Policy for Oregon state workers that lets fully remote workers live anywhere in America. Well, that has taxpayers footing the bill for their return to our state, and it has a number of you fired up after our most recent story. It's Senate Bill 853 had its first public hearing last week, and that's why we are talking about it. The bill would force those living in places like New York and Florida to fly back to Oregon for meetings on their own dime. The policy of taxpayers paying, well, that was adopted by state managers during COVID. Some agencies like the Treasury are not offering that policy, but most of state government is. And last week during that public hearing, the powerful workers union, SEIU 503, said they are against the bill. Here's the executive director, Melissa Unger.
I think one thing that's really important is that the policy around remote and hybrid work is not a policy that is in our CBA. It is a policy the state created. Management created this policy, and then workers decided to follow the policy. And so currently there's workers who have decided to follow a remote work policy where they were told they were not expected to come into their office and that their office is their home. And so they then made life changes based off management's policy around what remote work looked like.
And that's not all. The union executive questioned whether it was even an issue that deserved the attention that it's getting.
Finally, I think that it was kind of mentioned, we're not really convinced this is a problem. We don't know how much money have we spent on out-of-state travel. Has it been significant? Because I will tell you, our frontline workers can tell you lots of ways that the state could use their money better. And I am not sure that the money that we've spent on out-of-state travel is actually a huge problem. Do I think that there's headlines about it? I know that there's headlines about it. We read them, we got responses, and I agree. Some of our members do not think that this is a good idea. And I'm not saying it's a great idea, but we do think that there's real problems in state government. I've spent the last week with our frontline state workers, and they are in crisis.
Now, I have to say, I was really tempted to give the union leader a pivot award because that was a masterful pivot there to talk about going from talking about state employees paying for coming back to talking about what's all wrong with Oregon. So, interesting. But let's not get distracted on that. The dollars are not large, but the principle has many of you very angry. Kim left a message on our voicemail echoing a thought many of you shared.
I think remote workers should be in Oregon. They should be in the state where they're working. I don't understand why, they should be in Oregon.
Now, several of you do not like the idea that remote workers in other states are not paying Oregon income tax. And I checked with the Oregon Department of Revenue today. They tell me that those employees are only taxed by Oregon for the days they are physically in Oregon and working for the state. Otherwise, they would have to follow the laws, state tax laws of where they are living. For example, they would have to pay income tax in New York, but not in Florida. Sharon writes, "What also bothers me is about the out-of-state employees are being paid by Oregon taxpayers and are not paying Oregon income tax. So enjoying the pay from taxpayers but not contributing as a taxpayer." Mary is concerned as well. She wrote, "Travel expenses are one thing, but are these employees paying all state and local taxes in Oregon? If they're not, that is injustice. Travel costs are a drop in the bucket." Indeed, the travel costs for the two agencies that we've looked at, the Department of Human Services and the Oregon Health Authority, they total about $34,000. Now that is tiny compared to their budgets, but it's not nothing. And there is another side to this, by the way. We're not just hearing from people who hate this, we're hearing from people who like the policy. Some of you are saying it's okay for taxpayers to fly remote workers back to Oregon for meetings. Diana, for example, argues it's an important policy to get the best workers.
I can assure you that with the trends in the current employment market, that if we as a state did not offer that, we are losing out on the best talent.
And she's not the only one who feels that way. Erin says she is a state employee. Her comment, "Please at least present this as part of a normal culture rather than distinct and questionable because it's a government employee that may or may not be directly funded by taxes." Doug called in with concerns for whether workers are being treated fairly.
On its face, this seems like a problematic issue, but the testimony from SEIU today pointed to something that we haven't heard before, which is that this was in fact the state policy created by state managers, and workers relied on that policy and made major life moves, and now they're having at least part of that rug pulled out from underneath them, and that sounds pretty unfair.
Finally, Don says the state is probably saving money by not having to pay for office space for remote workers, adding paying for them to travel here may actually be saving the state money in the long run. There may be some employees that have enough value that it's worth it for us to pay for their travel. Thanks to Don and all the rest of you who wrote in and called in. We appreciate your input. You help make the show unique, and your insights help the rest of us think about the issue, maybe consider it from a point of view we'd not considered before.